A single father walked into an upscale restaurant expecting a quiet first date. The moment he saw the woman waiting alone at the center table, he understood everything. She was a single mother. And the laughter rippling from the corner booth told him the rest. His co-workers had set them up as a joke. Two broken people paraded for entertainment. He could have turned around. He could have walked out. Instead, he sat down across from her, looked her in the eyes, and said one sentence that silenced the entire room. The rain had stopped an hour before Nathan Cole stepped off the city bus 2 blocks from the Ardelia, but the sidewalk still held that wet glare that made every streetlight feel too bright. He stood there for a moment, adjusting the cuffs of a navy suit he had owned for 9 years. The fabric was clean. The shoulders were a little loose now. He had ironed the collar himself in the kitchen of his apartment, the same kitchen where he ate dinner alone 4 nights a week and where the radiator hissed if you stood too close. He had left his work truck parked at the apartment. It was old, the brake lights had been temperamental in the rain for the better part of a year, and he had not wanted to spend the evening worrying about it. So he had taken the bus and then walked the last 2 blocks and arrived at the curb outside the restaurant with his shoes only slightly damp. He was not a man who attracted attention easily. At 34, Nathan had the kind of face people forgot until they needed something fixed. He worked for a hotel maintenance company that serviced the high-end properties across the downtown corridor, and for almost a decade, he had been the man called in when an elevator stalled at 3 in the morning or a boiler gave out on a Sunday. He was good at his job. He was quiet about it. And in the eyes of the men he worked with, those 2 things had somehow become reasons to dislike him. The restaurant in front of him was the kind of place he had only ever entered through the service entrance. White tablecloths, brass fixtures, a doorman in a long coat who looked at his suit for half a second longer than necessary before pulling the handle. Nathan offered a small nod and stepped inside the warmth of the room, hitting him like a different climate altogether. He had agreed to come because Bryce Keller told him there was a woman who wanted to meet him. Bryce had said it casually, leaning against the supply truck on Tuesday afternoon, the way a man might mention the weather. She was a friend of a friend, recently divorced, looking for someone steady. Nathan had not wanted to come. He had said no twice. But Bryce had pushed, and the rest of the crew had stood around grinning. And somewhere in that pressure, Nathan had said yes just to end the conversation. Now, standing in the lobby of a restaurant he could not afford, he felt the first edge of doubt. The hostess smiled at him. He gave the reservation name. She walked him through a corridor of soft music and low conversation, past tables of couples leaning toward each other over candles, and into the main dining room. That was when he saw her. The woman was seated at a table in the exact center of the floor, not against a wall, not tucked into a booth, but in the middle of the room, where every diner could see her. She was wearing a dark green dress, her hair pulled back, simply her hands folded on the table in a way that suggested she had been folding them for a long time. She was not looking around. She was looking at the water glass in front of her, the way a person looks at something to avoid looking at everything else. Nathan understood before he took another step. He saw the corner booth 8 feet to his left. Bryce Keller was there, leaning back with a glass of wine in his hand, surrounded by 4 of the guys from the crew. Daniel from dispatch sat closest to the aisle, the only one not laughing yet. Marcus from the electrical team was next to him, already smirking. The other 2 were men Nathan recognized from the parking lot, but had never spoken to outside of a job site. They were watching him, all 5 of them, and the moment Nathan's eyes met Bryce's, Bryce lifted his glass, slightly the smallest toast, and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Nathan's first instinct was to walk out. The exit was behind him 6 steps away, and no one would have stopped him. He could have gone home, changed out of the suit, and pretended this evening had never happened. The crew would have laughed about it for a week, and then forgotten. The woman at the table would have eaten alone, paid her bill, and never known his name. But she would have known she had been left. That was the thought that stopped him. Whoever she was, whatever she had been told, she had put on a green dress and come to this restaurant, and sat down in the middle of a room full of strangers, and she was waiting for someone. If he walked out now, she would carry that. She would assume it was her. She would go home and replay every detail and try to figure out what had been wrong with her. Nathan had spent enough years carrying things alone to know what that kind of weight felt like. He took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the table. The woman did not see him until he was almost there. When she finally looked up, he saw her face fully for the first time. She was perhaps 31 or 32. There was a softness to her features, but a softness that had been worn down rather than preserved like a stone, smoothed by too much water. Her eyes registered him with a flicker of something that was not quite hope and not quite resignation. Whatever she had been expecting, it was not him. "Are you Grace?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was lower than he had imagined, and steadier. "Grace Whitman." "Nathan Cole." He gestured to the empty chair. "May I?" She nodded. He sat down across from her and immediately felt the eyes of the corner booth on his back. He did not turn to look. He kept his attention on Grace, who was studying him now with a quiet, careful attention, as if she had learned a long time ago to read people before trusting them. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, even though he was not late. "You're not." A small, polite expression crossed her face. "I came early." He noticed her hands then. They were not the hands of a woman who spent her days idle. The knuckles were a little reddened, the nails kept short, a thin silver bracelet on her right wrist that looked older than the dress. She had dressed for this evening with care, but not with extravagance. She had dressed like someone who could not afford to make a mistake. A waiter approached. Nathan ordered water. Grace already had hers. The waiter left, and the silence between them stretched for a moment. Not awkward, exactly, but uncertain, like two people trying to figure out which language they shared. "Bryce told me you worked together," Grace said. Nathan kept his expression still. "He did." "He said you were a friend of his." "He said that." She caught the tone in his voice, small as it was, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "But you're not." Nathan considered how to answer. From the corner booth, a low laugh broke out. It was not loud, but it carried the way a laugh in a quiet room always does. Grace did not turn her head, but he saw the slight shift in her shoulders, the way her hand tightened around the stem of the water glass. She had heard it. She had heard it before he arrived too, probably. She had been sitting here long enough. "Grace." Nathan kept his voice low. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from anything else in this room." She did not move. "I think we've both been brought here under false circumstances," he said. "The man in the booth behind me set this up. The people with him are co-workers of mine. I believe they intended for this evening to be a joke, at our expense." The color in her face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. It was a slow, almost imperceptible closing, like a door being pulled shut from inside. "I see," she said. "I'm sorry," Nathan said. "I didn't know until I walked in. If I had known, I wouldn't have come. Not because of you, because of them." Grace looked down at her hands. The silver bracelet caught the candlelight. "How did you know?" she asked. "When you walked in, they put you in the middle of the room," Nathan said, "and they put themselves where they could see your face." She breathed out very softly, and he could not tell if it was a sound of understanding or a sound of something breaking. The corner booth laughed again, louder this time. Bryce's voice cut through the noise of the restaurant in a stage whisper meant to be heard. "Look at him. He's actually talking to her." Daniel said something Nathan could not catch. Marcus laughed. Grace's jaw tightened. She lifted her chin and looked at Nathan directly, and for the first time, he saw something other than tiredness in her face. He saw the bottom of a person who had been pushed down too many times and had decided somewhere along the way that there was a floor beneath her she would not pass through. "You can leave," she said. I won't think any less of you. You didn't ask for this. Neither did you. No, but I'm used to it. The way she said it was not self-pity. It was a statement of fact, the way a person reports the weather. And it landed in Nathan harder than any of the laughter from the booth. He had spent his life around men who said cruel things and called it humor, and he had spent enough of his own life on the receiving end of small dismissals to recognize the shape of what she was describing. She was used to it. That was the part that did something to him. Grace. He leaned forward slightly. I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Did you come here tonight hoping to meet someone? She did not answer right away. Her eyes moved across his face, searching for the trick in the question the way an animal that has been hurt before checks a hand for a hidden grip. I came here hoping not to feel like a fool, she said finally. Meeting someone was a secondary thing. Then I'd like to ask one more question. All right. Would you let me stay? Not as a favor, not because you feel sorry for me, but because if we both stay, then whatever those men over there came here to see, they won't see it. Something moved across her face, not a smile, something more careful than a smile, the beginning of something she had stopped letting herself begin. Why are you doing this? She asked. Nathan thought about how to answer. He could have told her that he had been raising a household alone for years, that he understood what it was like to walk into rooms where other people had already decided who you were. He could have told her that he had spent enough Friday nights with the lights off and the television muted to know the particular silence of being seen as a person no one had chosen. He could have told her that he had come tonight because some small, foolish part of him had wanted just once, to be wanted in a way that was not transactional. But she did not need his life story. She needed an answer. Because you're not anyone's last option, he said, and I don't want you leaving here thinking you are. Grace's hand came up to her mouth very quickly, as if to hide something. She lowered it again before he could see what it was. From the corner booth, Bryce was watching now with a different expression. The smile was still there, but it had hardened. He had expected Nathan to flinch. He had expected Grace to crumble. He had not expected either of them to remain at the table after the joke was understood. The waiter returned with Nathan's water. Nathan thanked him by name because Nathan had spent his career being the man whose name no one bothered to learn, and he had decided a long time ago that he would not do that to anyone else. Grace picked up her menu. Her hands were not entirely steady, but they were steadier than they had been 5 minutes earlier. I haven't eaten in a restaurant like this in 4 years, she said quietly. I've never eaten in a restaurant like this, Nathan said. She looked at him over the top of the menu. For just a fraction of a second, the corner of her mouth lifted. Then we'll figure it out together, she said. Behind Nathan, the corner booth had gone briefly quiet. He could feel it. The room had not yet noticed what was happening at the center table. But the men who had paid to watch a humiliation were beginning to realize that they were not going to get the show they had ordered. And somewhere underneath that realization, Bryce Keller was beginning to think about what he would do next. The quiet at the corner booth did not last long. Nathan had expected that. Men like Bryce Keller did not absorb a small defeat in silence. They absorbed it by escalating, by raising the stakes until the discomfort belonged to someone else. Within a minute, Bryce was standing. He carried his wine glass with him like a prop he had not finished using. He crossed the short distance between the booth and the center table, with an exaggerated ease, smiling the entire way, as if he had been invited. When he arrived, he set his free hand on the back of the empty chair at Nathan's side and leaned slightly forward. Sorry to interrupt, Bryce said, his voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. I didn't want to be rude, and not come say hello. Nathan did not look up at him immediately. He finished a sip of water, placed the glass down with care, and then raised his eyes. Grace had gone very still across the table, her hands resting flat on either side of her menu, her face composed in the manner of someone who had been here before in different rooms with different men. Bryce," Nathan said evenly. "You can go back to your table. In a minute." Bryce turned his attention to Grace. The smile he gave her pretended to be warm, but had nothing warm inside it. "Grace, right, Nathan didn't tell me much about you. Then again, he wouldn't. Would he? Not really his style." Grace did not answer. "You know, I've worked with this guy for almost 8 years," Bryce continued, "and in all that time I don't think I've ever seen him on an actual date. So this is kind of a special occasion for the rest of us." A small, scattered laugh came from the corner booth. "Daniels. Marcus is a half-second later." 2 of the surrounding tables looked over attention drawn by the volume more than the content. One of those tables, a couple in their 50s, smiled politely, ready to enjoy whatever scene was unfolding. They did not yet understand what kind of scene it was. "Bryce," Nathan said again, "go sit down. I just want to ask one thing." Bryce turned the wine glass slowly in his fingers. "I'm curious, Nathan. Genuinely curious. Are you actually interested in this woman? Or are you just trying to look like the better man? Because there's a difference." The words landed with deliberate weight. Bryce had aimed them not at Nathan, but past him at the listening room at every diner who had now turned their attention to the center table. He wanted an audience for the answer. He wanted Nathan to have to perform. Nathan kept his face still. He understood what was being done to him. He had spent enough years in rooms full of men who measured each other by who could be made to flinch first, and he had learned that the only real defense was refusal. You did not have to win the game. You only had to refuse to play it on the terms offered. "I'm having dinner with Grace," Nathan said. "That's all that's happening at this table. Whatever you're doing it alone." The smile on Bryce's face thinned. He had wanted defensiveness, or anger, or an awkward attempt at sincerity that he could mock. He had received none of those things. He recalibrated. "You're a single dad, aren't you, Nathan?" Bryce said, his voice softening into something meant to sound thoughtful. "And Grace here, she's what recently divorced. I just think it's nice. Really. 2 people in similar situations finding each other. It's almost like the universe knew." Grace's eyes went down to the table. Not out of shame, out of the effort of holding something steady inside herself. Nathan saw her thumb press against the silver bracelet on her wrist, anchoring herself with a small physical detail. "You don't know anything about her situation," Nathan said. "I know enough." "No," Nathan said. "You don't. You know what someone told you, and you turned it into a joke. That's not knowing. That's just borrowing other people's lives to entertain yourself." A flicker of color rose in Bryce's cheeks. He covered it with another laugh, but the laugh was a beat too late, and the woman at the next table noticed. She set down her fork. Her husband glanced at her, and then at Nathan, and the 2 of them exchanged a look that Nathan could not read, but that he registered as a small change in the room's temperature. Bryce sensed it too. He had counted on the room being on his side. He had counted on people enjoying the spectacle, on laughter spreading outward like a contagion. But the spectacle was not unfolding the way he had designed it. Nathan wasn't playing the fool. Grace wasn't collapsing. And the people at the surrounding tables were beginning to understand that they were not watching comedy. Bryce shifted tactics. He turned away from Nathan, slightly addressing Grace directly. "Look, Grace, I just want to be honest with you. Nathan's a decent enough guy. But you should know what you're walking into. He's the kind of guy who works a maintenance shift on Saturday nights. He drives a truck older than most of his co-workers. He's not somebody who's going to take you places like this. Tonight is the exception, not the rule. I just don't want you to get the wrong idea." The cruelty of it was so casual that for a moment Grace did not respond. She lifted her eyes from the table and looked at Bryce with an expression Nathan would remember for a long time afterward. Not anger. Something more deliberate. The look of a woman who had been spoken about over and around for so many years that she had developed the patience of a person waiting for a man to finish saying a thing he did not yet realize he should not have said. "What's your name?" Grace asked. Bryce blinked. "I'm sorry. Your name. I didn't catch it." "Bryce. Bryce." Grace repeated as if testing the sound of it. "Bryce, I don't know you, but I know your type. I was married to your type. He used to talk about other people the way you're talking about Nathan right now, as if pointing out what other people didn't have made him taller. It didn't. It just made everyone tired of standing near him." The corner booth had gone quiet. Daniel was looking at his drink. Marcus was looking at the wall. The other two were looking at Bryce with the particular embarrassment of men who had laughed at a joke and were now realizing they had laughed at the wrong thing. Bryce's face had gone tight. "I was just trying to be honest with you." "You weren't," Grace said. "You were trying to humiliate him in front of me, and me in front of him, and both of us in front of everyone else in this room. You weren't being honest. You were being entertained." The man at the next table set down his napkin. He did not say anything yet, but the movement was deliberate, like a person standing up before deciding what to do next. The woman with him was watching Bryce with an expression that had moved past discomfort into something firmer. Nathan stood up. He did it slowly without theatrics, just the simple act of pushing back his chair and rising to his full height. He was not a large man, but he was solid in the way of someone who had spent years carrying tools and equipment up service stairs, and standing there in his 9-year-old suit, he had a kind of presence that he had never bothered to cultivate, but that arrived now when he needed it. "Bryce," Nathan said, "I want to say something, and I want you to listen, because I'm only going to say it once." The room had stilled. A waiter near the kitchen door had stopped moving. The pianist in the corner played one measure too softly to compete with what was happening, and then let the music thin out altogether. "The problem here isn't that Grace is a single mother," Nathan said. "And it isn't that I'm a single father. The problem here is you. You looked at two people who have already lost things you've never had to lose, and you decided their pain was funny. You set this up because you thought we'd be too embarrassed to do anything but sit here and take it. You thought we'd swallow it the way people like us are supposed to swallow things. And you brought your friends, so you'd have an audience for it." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had given him the quiet of its own accord. "I'm not ashamed of raising a family on my own," Nathan said. "Grace shouldn't be ashamed of surviving what she survived. The only person in this room who should be ashamed is the one who came here tonight to make money off of mocking us. And I'd like to know how much that was, Bryce. How much did you stand to make off of this?" Bryce's face had gone the color of paper. "Nathan, come on," he said, attempting a laugh that did not survive its first syllable. "It was a joke. That's all it was. A joke. You're making it into something it wasn't." "Then tell me what it was." "It was just, the guys were curious if you'd actually go through with a date. We had a little bit of fun with it. That's all." "How much, Bryce?" The question hung in the air. From the corner booth, no one met Nathan's eye. Daniel had set his glass down and was now studying a point on the carpet near his shoe. Marcus had crossed his arms tight against his chest, like a man trying to take up less space than he currently occupied. Grace was watching Bryce now. Not with hatred. With something colder than that. With the steady, unbroken attention of a woman who had finally been given a face to attach to every cruelty she had ever taken alone. $200? Bryce said, finally the words slipping out as if he had not given them permission to. It was just $200, pooled, between the 5 of us. Nobody meant anything by it. A small, sharp sound came from Grace's throat. Not a sob. The noise a person makes when something they have suspected for a long time is finally confirmed, and the confirmation is somehow worse than the suspicion. Nathan did not look at her. If he looked at her now, he was not sure what he would do. $200, he said quietly. So that's what an evening like this is worth to you and your friends. $40 per man at your table. The price of watching two people you don't know get torn down for sport. Nathan, that's not what it was. That's exactly what it was. The man at the next table stood up fully now. He was perhaps 60 gray at the temples, wearing a suit that fit because it had been made to. His wife placed a hand on his arm, but she did not pull him back. "Excuse me," the man said, addressing Bryce. "I don't know any of you, but I've been listening, and I think it's time you went back to your table. Or better, I think it's time you left." "Sir, this is between us," Bryce said. "No," the man said. "It stopped being between you the moment you made the rest of us watch it." A second voice came from across the room, a woman 2 tables away. "He's right." A third, a man near the window. "Sit down or leave, son. This isn't entertainment." It did not become a chorus. It did not need to. 3 voices were enough. Bryce looked around the room and saw what he had not allowed himself to see until that moment, which was that the audience he had imagined on his side had never been on his side at all. They had been watching, yes, but they had been watching the way people watch a fire they intend to call the authorities about. He turned back to Nathan. The smile was gone. What replaced it was uglier and more honest. "You think you're better than me," Bryce said, his voice lower, now meant for Nathan alone. "You think doing this little speech in front of these people makes you something. It doesn't. Tomorrow, you're still the guy who fixes elevators." "That's right," Nathan said. "I am, and I sleep fine." Grace stood up. She did it the way she did everything, with a quiet economy, no chair scraping, no dramatic motion. She rose to her feet and faced Bryce directly, and Nathan saw in that moment the woman she must have been before the years had taken pieces of her. There was steel underneath the softness. There had always been steel. "I want to say something," Grace said. "Not for him, for me." The room waited. My whole life I've been told that being a mother on my own makes me less desirable, less stable, less of a person. I've been told it by men I dated, by my own family, by women at jobs I no longer have. And I started to believe it. I came here tonight because I was so tired of believing it that I thought maybe a stranger could look at me and see something different. Her voice did not break. It moved forward steadily, like a person walking down a hallway they had walked many times before, only now with the lights on. And then I sat down at this table and realized I'd been brought here as a joke. And the worst part wasn't that you arranged it. The worst part was that for about 30 seconds I almost agreed with you. I almost thought, of course, this is what I am. Of course, this is what I'm worth. A line on a tally sheet between 5 men who were bored. Grace's eyes moved across the room, taking in every face that had been listening. But I'm not. And I'm done pretending I am. I'm done apologizing for the shape my life took. And I'm done sitting quietly while men like you decide what kind of evening I'm allowed to have. The room did not applaud. The room did something better. It held its silence with her, the way a congregation holds silence after a hard truth has been spoken, making space for words people intend to remember. Bryce took a step back from the table. His hand on the wine glass had gone unsteady. Whatever he had come to this restaurant to win, he had lost. And he was beginning to understand the size of what he had lost. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," Bryce said. The words sounded hollow even to him. "No," Nathan said. "We're making the right size deal out of exactly what this was." From the entrance to the dining room, a tall man in a charcoal suit had begun to walk toward them. The restaurant's manager. He had been alerted perhaps by a server, perhaps by the change in the room's atmosphere. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes had already taken in the scene and arrived at a conclusion. Bryce saw him coming. He turned, half raising his hand, signaling for assistance he believed would be on his side. He did not yet understand whose assistance the manager was here to provide. Nathan looked at Grace across the table. She was still standing, Her hands were no longer trembling. The silver bracelet caught the candlelight one more time, and for the first time that evening she met his eyes without protecting any part of herself. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." The manager arrived at the table with the unhurried walk of a man who had spent a long career deciding which side of a conflict to stand on, and he had already made his decision before he began the walk. He was tall, with silver at his temples, and the steady voice of a man who had been in this building longer than most of the staff. His name tag read, Owen Bradley. He stopped beside Bryce, not Nathan, and addressed him directly. "Sir," Owen said, "I'd like to ask you and your party to settle your bill and leave." Bryce's mouth opened slightly. The expression on his face was not anger yet. It was confusion, the brief disorientation of a man who had walked into a room expecting one outcome and had been handed another. "You're asking us to leave," Bryce said. "I am." "Why, we haven't done anything." "You've made other diners uncomfortable," Owen said. "You've disturbed the tables around you, and from what I've heard in the last several minutes, you came here tonight to humiliate two of my guests. That isn't something I allow in this restaurant." Daniel from Dispatch had already risen from the corner booth. Marcus followed a beat after not meeting anyone's eye, and the other two were standing as well, gathering jackets with the silent efficiency of men who had realized somewhere in the last few minutes that they didn't want to be associated with this any longer than necessary. None of them looked at Bryce. None of them looked at Nathan or Grace either. Bryce turned back to the manager. "I'm a paying customer." "You were," Owen said. "Your bill is being prepared at the front. Please collect it and leave the dining room." Something inside Bryce gave way then. Not dramatically, just a small collapse around the edges of his face, like a paper bag deflating when air is let out. He looked at Nathan perhaps for some final acknowledgement, perhaps for an opening he could still exploit. Nathan did not give him either. Nathan simply stood there beside the table hands at his sides and waited for Bryce to do what he was being asked to do. Bryce walked out. He did not say anything else. The four men from the corner booth followed him spaced apart, none of them speaking to each other. As they crossed the dining room, Nathan saw the older man at the next table watching them with the same steady attention he had given Bryce earlier, an attention that did not need to say anything more, because everything that needed to be said had already been said. When the door at the front of the restaurant closed behind them, the room did not erupt. There was no applause, no whispered commentary loud enough to be heard at the center table. The dining room simply resumed itself slowly, the way a held breath releases. A waiter moved again. The pianist found his place in the music. The couple at the next table returned to their meal, though the wife caught Grace's eye once and gave her a small nod. Woman to woman that did not require translation. Owen turned to Nathan and Grace. The professional mask softened slightly. "I apologize for what you both had to sit through tonight," he said. "Your meal is on the house. I'll send over whatever you'd like." "That isn't necessary," Nathan said. "It is," Owen said. "Please, stay, eat, take your time." He gave Grace a small, careful nod, then walked back toward the front of the restaurant with the same unhurried pace. Nathan looked at Grace across the table. She was still standing. Her hand was resting lightly on the back of her chair. The silver bracelet had slid down her wrist a little, and she pushed it back into place with a small automatic motion, something to do with her hands. "I can get you a car," Nathan said, "if you want to go home. No one would think anything of it. Tonight wasn't what either of us came here for." Grace looked at him for a long moment. The candle between them had burned down a quarter of an inch. "Are you asking because you want me to leave?" she said. "Or because you think I want to? Because I think you've earned the right to decide." She lowered herself back into her chair, slowly, deliberately. She set her hands on the table the way she had set them when he first walked in, but the hands were different now. They were not folded in protection. They were resting. "I'd like to stay," she said. "If you would." Nathan sat down. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The waiter came by with new menus and a small basket of bread, and Grace tore a piece off with her fingers and ate it like a person who had not allowed themselves to be hungry in public for a long time. Nathan ordered something simple. Grace ordered the same. The waiter left them, and the dining room settled around them like water around a stone. "I almost didn't come tonight," Grace said. "Why did you?" "Because the woman who told me about it said you were someone I should meet. She said you were quiet, steady. She made it sound like maybe I'd been wrong about what kind of men were still out there." Grace's mouth moved into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. "I should have known. People don't set up strangers in restaurants like this. Not for kindness." "She lied to you." "She did. Or someone lied to her, and she passed it along without checking." Nathan turned his water glass slowly between his fingers. "Bryce told me you were a friend of a friend, recently divorced, looking for someone steady. He said it the way you'd describe a coworker. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked." "Neither did I. Then we both arrived here without enough information." "Yes." Grace looked down at the bread on her plate. "But we got here, and we stayed." There was a small, careful breath taken between two people who were not in a hurry. Nathan studied her, not in the way men sometimes study women, but in the way you study a piece of a building you are trying to understand the load on. He saw how her shoulders had carried weight for a long time. He saw how her eyes had learned not to expect much, and how in the last hour something behind them had shifted slightly, like a door she had stopped trying to open had been left ajar by someone else. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you walked in tonight and you saw what was happening, why didn't you leave?" Nathan thought about how to answer. He had been asking himself the same question since the moment he sat down at this table, and the answer he kept arriving at was not the heroic one he might have given if he wanted to sound like a better man than he was. "Because if I left," he said, "you would have thought it was about you, and it wasn't. And I didn't want you carrying that home." Grace looked at him for a long time after he said it. "You don't know me," she said finally. "You didn't know me an hour ago." "No. And you stayed anyway." "I stayed because the right thing to do was clear. That doesn't make me anything special. It just means I could see it." "A lot of men can see it, Nathan. They just don't do it." He did not have an answer for that, so he did not give one. The food came. They ate slowly. Grace told him about the years she had spent reassembling a life after a marriage that had ended badly, not in any single dramatic way, but in the slow accumulation of small cruelties that had made her question her own perception of what was normal. She had lost a job she had been good at. She had lost a circle of friends who turned out to have been her husband's friends all along. She had spent 2 years learning to walk into a grocery store without flinching at the possibility of seeing someone who knew the version of her life that had collapsed. Nathan listened. He did not interrupt to compare. When she was done, he told her in fewer words that he had been carrying responsibility on his own for a long time, that he was the man at his company everyone called, and no one invited, that he had stopped expecting evenings like this one, because the disappointment of expecting them had become heavier than the loneliness of not. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel something for me," he said. "I'm telling you because you told me what you told me, and it wouldn't be fair to let you carry that alone across the table." "I know," Grace said. "That's why it lands." They did not order dessert. They did not exchange phone numbers at the end of the meal, although Nathan offered, and Grace said she would like to think about it for a day, and would find him if she meant it. He understood. He gave her the name of the company he worked for in case she needed an honest place to start. Outside the restaurant, the rain had started again, lighter this time, more mist than rain. Owen Bradley nodded to them both as they left. The doorman called Grace a car. Nathan walked the 2 blocks back to the bus stop because he had come that way. And there was something about the evening that did not want to be hurried. He did not think about it as victory. He thought about it as something more difficult to name. He thought about how a person could spend years believing that quiet decency went unrewarded, and then one evening discover that the reward had never been the point. The point had been the doing of the thing. Several weeks passed. Nathan worked his usual shifts. He answered service calls at 2 of the downtown hotels, replaced a compressor at one of them, spent a long Wednesday afternoon under a service stairwell that smelled of bleach and old steam. Bryce Keller did not return to the company. He had given notice the Monday after the dinner, citing personal reasons. The men from the corner booth avoided Nathan in the break room for the first week, and then gradually began nodding to him again, the way men nod when they cannot bring themselves to apologize, but want to acknowledge that something has shifted. Daniel was the first. He passed Nathan in the corridor outside the dispatch office one morning and stopped half-turned, like he was about to say something. Whatever it was did not come. He nodded once and kept walking. Marcus, a few days later, slid a coffee onto Nathan's bench without explanation. Nathan accepted both gestures without comment. He was not interested in their apologies. He was interested in his own life, which had begun to feel slightly larger than it had been before. On a Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Grace called the number she had taken from him. She did not apologize for the silence. He did not ask her to. She suggested a small diner she liked on the west side of the city, a place with a counter and 6 booths and a coffee pot that had been on the same burner since the morning. She said she could meet him there at 4. He said yes before she finished the sentence. When he arrived, she was already there, same silver bracelet, different dress plainer. She was sitting in a booth by the window, and the light coming through the glass landed on her in a way that made her look like someone who had been resting, which she had not been able to look like the first time he saw her. He slid into the booth across from her. She smiled. This time, it was a real smile, the kind that takes a moment to assemble itself, but stays once it has. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd call. I almost didn't." What changed? Grace turned her coffee cup slowly between her hands. "I realized I'd been waiting to feel ready, and I wasn't going to feel ready. I just had to decide if I wanted to see you again or not, and the answer was yes, and the rest was me getting out of my own way." Nathan considered that. "I can understand getting out of your own way. I've been doing it most of my life." She laughed, quietly. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and he registered it the way a person registers a sound they did not realize they had been missing. They ordered coffee. They ordered pie. They sat in the booth for almost 2 hours, and the conversation moved easily from one thing to another, not because either of them was trying to make it move, but because there was no longer a performance being demanded of either of them. There was no audience. There was no joke. There was only the booth and the coffee, and 2 people who had decided to find out who the other was without anyone else deciding it for them. When they parted that evening, Nathan walked her to her car. She turned to him before she opened the door. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right." For a long time I believed that the kind of life I had made me harder to love. Not impossible, just harder. And I'd made peace with that. I'd built a version of myself that didn't need to be loved that way anymore. Grace looked at him directly. The streetlight caught her face. "I'm not telling you this so you'll promise me anything. I'm telling you because the night at the Ardelia, you told me I wasn't anyone's last option. And I didn't believe you. I wanted to, but I didn't. And tonight, sitting in that booth, I noticed I'd stopped not believing you. I don't know when it happened. But it did." She got into her car. She drove away. Nathan stood on the curb for a long time after the taillights had disappeared, thinking about the words she had said and the words he had said to her at a different table on a different evening, and how strange it was that the truest things a person ever told another person were almost always the things they had not rehearsed. He walked toward the bus stop through the autumn air. The city was quieter than usual. He carried himself differently than he had carried himself a month before. Not taller, not prouder, just more honestly. Like a man who had stopped expecting the world to confirm what he had always known about himself and had decided instead to live as if it already had.